Over to, right, over to you, Professor Burkane.
Well, indeed, thank you, Jack. Now, I'm just trying to get rid of the. I can see all the sort of the faces on the right hand side, so I've tried to. Okay, that's okay. That I can do. I've minimized it. That's fine. Okay, right. Well, without further ado, let's get to sort of the what the session consists of, because that summarizes where we're at. That there's an old expression, publish or perish. And indeed, all academics live by this maxim, which is that if you don't publish, then you become less relevant. So there's nothing new in the game of publishing. And the reality is that, as you'll all know as doctoral students, that indeed the thesis that you produce, it's a form of publication. It goes through a sort of refereeing process, i.e. the sort of the examiners, and publication is not a lot different to that. Because the thing is, though, that there's publishing, and that's what I'm going to sort of to talk about in this session. Just to sort of, if I can sort of use my cursor here to sort of to highlight the sort of the key aspect of all of this, which is contribution to sort of the body, or corpus, as it's known in Latin, of knowledge, which is the sort of the sum total of everything we know. And indeed, those of us, and we've all been involved in this, who sort of carry out research, know that the first place that you go looking for background information is the literature, and that consists of whatever you find in the sort of the published realm. And by that, what I'm actually differentiating is the sort of that which, of course, will tend to have an ISBN number, and that which does not. So there's in fact a vast spectrum of sort of information, not all of which, of course, is authoritative. And the point I'm trying to make here, as much as possible, is that sort of that there's a kind of hierarchy, and the sort of the hierarchy of published information, particularly as to regards to research, is in sort of journal articles. And I think that's where we're sort of at, because you can do anyone can publish quite literally. And indeed, I was looking at this very recently, sort of that if you want to publish, again, a book, you can do that, and it's entirely possible, and you can get ISBN numbers, and you simply sort of take your text to a sort of a self-publishing outfit, and they will publish it, and that is kind of the end of that particular part of the process. As to whether anybody will ever read it is another matter. Clearly, you can go to sort of established publishers, and they will sort of market it in a much more aggressive way, you hope. But nonetheless, the sort of the big differentiator in terms of that aspect of publishing is it won't have gone through the sort of the refereeing process, albeit, and I've certainly done this, you referee other people's texts just to sort of to give it a sort of an overview as to sort of whether you think it will sell. But it's not the same as sort of going through referee journals, which is, I think, that the thing that most researchers or academics will sort of aspire to, because of course that's seen as the sort of the pinnacle of how people develop expertise, and particularly those who want to sort of to achieve professorships. It's normally the sort of thing, well, both getting grants, which of course is the sort of the important thing, and then disseminating, because of course that's the whole point. There's no point in carrying out research if nobody sort of knows about it, which of course is where publishing comes into its own. Right, okay, so I'm really always conscious of time, that if I delay, we don't get through it all. So, okay, what we're going to look at today is the sort of the competence in writing skills. And let me just sort of say the caveat here is that sort of that anybody who can sort of write naturally, it's a bit like anybody who can sort of run fast. It's a talent that if you're born with, you're really lucky, because yeah, I can write reasonably competently, but I'm not brilliant. But really good writers, you know, that they have such a sort of incredible skill and the ability to sort of get down your thoughts in a way which is coherent and has got sort of persuasiveness, and does all the things that are required in terms of what we're talking about here today. It's a sort of great thing to be able to sort of achieve, because it's well, like everything, there's a lot of agony that goes into writing, even for the sort of the established writers. And indeed, I think it's also something that even if you have a little bit of skill, the more you practice it, the better you get at it. But nonetheless, it's something which requires, you know, as everything in this world, hard work. Secondly, the hierarchy of publications, and I think I alluded to that a couple of moments ago. As I say, you can probably publish something in a paper, and actually the irony is that sort of that there's more readership in a sort of journalistic article than there probably will be in a sort of referee journal article. But hey, that's not sort of what the nature of the game is. The sort of the referee journal will have gone through a sort of a rigorous process of sort of refereeing, and I'll come back and talk about more of that. Indeed, some of you may have been through the refereeing process and will know the sort of the travails that were involved in trying to sort of to satisfy the needs of the sort of the referees, like the examiners, as you'll all have experienced or will experience if you go through the sort of, or when you go through the Bible, I should say. Okay, the fundamentals of structuring academic writing, they all have a kind of broad formula, which to a very large extent doesn't vary that much. You know, the introduction, the sort of methods, the sort of the data, the discussion, and the conclusions, and by and large, they all have that kind of broad outline. But how you actually sort of achieve it will depend upon the sort of particular sort of hairstyles of the sort of the publication that you're hoping to achieve, and they, you know, they don't vary that much either. And of course, your own particular sort of approach and stylistic sort of flourishes, if I may put it like that. Okay, I think that, you know, in always say whenever we sort of carry research, part of what the sort of the endeavour is the sort of the learning that others will sort of draw from it. And indeed, the sort of I'm always really sort of keen in terms of when I do it, and I encourage others to do similar, is the sort of the learning that you sort of derive, because of course that's a really valuable part of the process. Importantly, I was talking about this yesterday to some students. Keep it simple, keep it clear, you know, and you know, if you're dealing with something which is really complex, as somebody said to me many years ago, the really clever thing is to make complex things simple, not the other way around, i.e. to take simple things and makes them more complex. And dare I say it, the best journal articles, the best articles, and the best writing I've ever written are those who actually sort of, they manage to disentangle and present the sort of that clarity, which gives people sort of a clear understanding of what it is that they're trying to drive in terms of their consultation of articles. And indeed, the final point here is that sort of what you hope is that whatever you do, it contributes to sort of the existing theory. And, you know, in theory, I don't want to sort of get too much into sort of the philosophical aspects, because, you know, that can take us into another arena, as it were. But nonetheless, theory is explanation, and if your writing and publication does not contribute to sort of to existing theory, and indeed to sort of to push the boundaries, then there's a very good aspect to sort of, well, what is it doing? But hey, that is another question. Okay, the rationale for publishing. I don't know why, but there's actually a sort of red mark. It's not on my screen. It must be on the slides, because I've just noticed it. So it's not important. It'll just be there forevermore. But okay. So why should you publish? Well, okay, it's providing answers. The assumption will be that you, again, I fully appreciate you can write a novel. Of course, there's no, well, okay, I say there's no, you don't have to do research to sort of publish a novel. But what we're talking about here is something which is, we'll assume, is based upon the sort of research that you've carried out, which goes through the sort of the discipline process of collecting data, making sense of it, comparing it to the existing sort of body of knowledge, i.e. theories, and then sort of developing something which is relatively sort of novel or new, which will sort of provide a new dimension, or sort of another aspect or dimension to sort of the existing methods and sort of ways that we think about particular issues or problems or phenomena. And again, you know, these are all sort of words that you should be fairly familiar with in terms of sort of what it is that you've done in carrying out your own research. I've said that new knowledge should be disseminated through the appropriate media. And, you know, that brings it back to the fact that quite clearly, if you're going to sort of to publish a thesis, yeah, for sure, I would sort of encourage anyone, if it's got enough sort of currency, yeah, publishing the sort of the you know, the press, if you wish, and it could certainly be the professional press, or indeed in the mainstream press, if you believe that it's important enough to do that and there's sufficient interest. But more particularly, think about sort of getting it published through the sort of the various forums, and of course that what that will normally be in the first instance is a conference paper. And the thing about conferences is, because the sort of the bar is normally lower, and you know, these things are always relative depending upon the type of conference, that you can do something during the course of your sort of your work, whereas journal articles are sort of a bit more difficult. It's more likely that you'll be publishing subsequent to having completed the doctorate, But it's not impossible to sort of publish during the course of it. But you've got to be careful you don't sort of become too distracted. But undoubtedly, I would sort of say using sort of published articles as a way to demonstrate the sort of the worth of your work is no bad thing. Okay, so ideas generate new thinking, which becomes self-sustaining, and of course that's all part of the sort of the whole arena of sort of academia. That new ideas, they float about. Indeed, I mentioned a moment ago, conferences. It's a sort of very good opportunity to sort of to exchange ideas, to develop them, to synthesize them potentially, and then to sort of derive something sort of slightly new, or maybe even radical, as it were, if that's what your desire is and you're able to achieve that. And then, of course, that sort of contributes into the sort of the body, and others can sort of look at it and they can sort of be inspired, one hopes, to go off and do something different with theirs. And of course, that's the other thing. What you hope is that sort of your work will become sort of referenced by others, and it becomes, as if you like, a benchmark for as long as possible, but if only for sort of temporary period, until others develop it as a stepping stone to other things, and that's part, if you like, of the sort of the being the community, the sort of the academy, which is what we talk about. And indeed, if you don't publish your work, nobody gets to know about it, and therefore it becomes, well, it is unknown, quite literally, which is just such a great shame. Getting the message you want is critical to develop a reputation as a competent researcher. And indeed, as I mentioned a few months ago, that if you want to be sort of regarded as a for academic promotion and sort of readerships and professorships and the sort of like, it's a very sort of essential part of doing that. Whoops, I've gone too quickly. And I'm coming back to sort of the Viva part of it, because I know that sort of many of those watching today will be at the stage of either completion. I know that sort of one person we were speaking to earlier on is just about to submit, or will be sort of in the process of completing their sort of their thesis, and will eventually then submit and be examined. So I think if it's at all possible, and again, I'm not saying that it's essential, but if you've published your sort of work in appropriate forums such as academic conferences, or even sort of in journals, if that's possible, then it'll be really sort of helpful in terms of persuading the examiners that the sort of work has got the sort of the level of kudos and currency that would be expected. Where to publish? Now, that's always the difficulty. And again, I'm not going to agonize too much about the sort of the first one, because I've talked about already. Knowledge is knowledge wherever you get it from. And certainly sort of when I was doing mine way back in the sort of the 1990s, I was reading a lot of sort of what I regard as practitioner orientated literature, which obviously didn't have the same kudos as academic journals, but nonetheless, what I was doing was looking at sort of the impact of something, and it's the way in which it played out amongst the sort of the practitioners. I did a doctorate, not sort of a DBA, but nonetheless it was very similar in sort of the intent. And what I was interested in is, where were these people deriving their sort of their knowledge and inspiration from? So sort of looking at sort of what I call the practitioner orientated literature was important. And again, I would encourage anybody who can assist in sort of developing the sort of the understanding and the sort of the expertise of practitioners to sort of to publish in that forum, because, dare I say it, with almost no exceptions, I've never come across, well, in fact, what am I saying here? There's no exception as far as I'm concerned, but I challenge others to sort of to say that I'm wrong, that practitioners do not read refereed journal articles. There's a lot of academics who don't read journal articles for that matter, but mainly amongst those who are teachers rather than researchers. Okay, my second piece of advice is, don't be overambitious. Dip your toe in the water, and by that I mean try a conference article, because of course that's a good way of getting to know things, and you can possibly sort of make mistakes, and the sort of the level of expectation is low enough to achieve that. The one health warning I'm going to give to you, and some of you may even have attempted this, getting sort of journal articles published is no easy feat, particularly, and of course that also depends upon the sort of level of the sort of the journal. And dare I say it, in the UK, and it's kind of fairly internationally sort of regarded, there's a star system, and it goes normally from sort of 1-star journals to sort of 4-star, and 4-star are the most difficult, and that's normally sort of internationally sort of or research of international quality. So it's a really high level, and it's normally sort of fairly big studies, as it were. So it's you know, it's not impossible, but much less likely to be sort of the place where sort of a single sort of PhD researcher is going to publish. But all the other thing I would also sort of encourage you to do, if you've got a supervisor, which you should have, and you know that it's in their interest to help you to publish, and it's in their own interest because of course they'll have been part of this work, and that's a really good way of sort of learning from sort of those who've sort of probably been through sort of the process on numerous occasions. But of course the important thing is, whatever you do, you know, have a go, and it's learn from the sort of the mistakes and the sort of the disappointments and sort of the kickbacks and whatever that. So kickbacks is probably a different expression, but the sort of the knockbacks, that's the word, the old expression, the knockbacks that you will inevitably have. Rarely, if at all, will you sort of have your work accepted in the first instance. Referees, that their job is to sort of to find fault. So it's a bit like when you go to the Viva. Rarely do sort of Vivas end in sort of you know, pass with no amendments whatsoever. Examiners like to sort of to look at it from their own perspective and to find things, well, fault, and to sort of to suggest things that they would have done differently. And again, I've mentioned this, to sort of start with an internal conference or some other forums, including DocCo, safe spaces to develop ideas where you won't get shot down, and people will assist you and facilitate in sort of developing your thoughts in such a way as you come out with something better in the future. And indeed also, chapters and books are also a good way. And certainly I did a few of these during my own sort of PhD, because the normal expectation is that you write about the things that you're involved in, and that's perfectly sort of fine. And okay, there may be a bit of editorializing by the sort of the editors or editor of the sort of the book, but beyond that, it's not the same as the sort of the refereeing process. But hey, yeah, I know that I've done chapters for books which are not dissimilar to sort of the refereeing process, whereby they you know, they come back and ask for lots of things to be done, and that's also fine because they've got a view about what they want to achieve. Okay, and you know, articles and journals, the key objective for active researchers, those of you in academia, which I think is everyone, will know that sort of all academics normally aspire to be sort of regarded as active, and regular sort of publication in journal articles is the way to sort of to attain that moniker or that label. Okay. Academic publishing is pretty straightforward. If all that you do is if you go to them with something which is highly derivative, they're not going to publish it because there's no contribution to knowledge. So what you're doing should be unique, but it's a kind of you know, to define unique means it's a contribution to knowledge in some regard. And yeah, I've done enough Vivas to know that sort of that does we say this and everyone kind of knows what they want, but there's no clear sort of knowledge. And you'll have to forgive, the phone is going off, so someone will answer that. But what does that mean? It may mean that you take existing sort of knowledge, you collect data which is slightly different, and you sort of derive different sort of conclusions as a consequence. Provide logical reasons why you think your work is important and relevant. Although I think that if the work is logical and relevant, it will speak for itself, particularly in terms of the conclusions, because you'll show why what you've done has that sort of particular sort of consequence. Don't rush, like they're all about most things. The more time to be devoted to planning, the better.
Delivery's coming in 3 minutes, then you need to come in here. You're going to have to back into that.
Oh, sorry. Well, I need to move. Excuse me. I've got a delivery, so I'm going to go into another room if that's okay. So, yeah. Well, I'm going to call it. You were supposed to.
Certainly entertaining.
Excuse me. Webinar. Okay, so rushing into publication is a mistake made by many. And if you rush, then don't be surprised if you sort of you hit the sort of the barriers and the sort of the knockbacks I was talking about a couple of moments ago. Writing is a skill that's difficult for many, so the more you sort of seek to develop that skill, the better. And indeed, anybody who's been through a doctorate will know that when you start to sort of to write it, it's a bit like sort of climbing a mountain. I've never climbed a mountain, but I know enough to know that you plan for it and you take it in stages. You don't do it in one day. And it's a sort of process of sort of development. And again, I come back to sort of conferences. You know, they're a really great place to sort of to start. in such a way as that you can provide your initial knowledge and help to sort of to shape it. And of course, you're with people who are sort of like-minded, including sort of seasoned academics who, you know, I've never found any exception to this. They're always really sort of enthused by what they can sort of do to sort of make life easier for you, or at least to sort of help you to sort of develop your thinking. So it's a really valuable way to sort of to do this. Keep in mind where you may wish to, say, where you might wish to publish. And again, I think it really depends that if your sort of work is still in progress, it's really unlikely that you're going to get into sort of to one of the sort of high-star journals. Probably unlikely you're going to get into a one-star journal. And also do remember that it's a really competitive environment. And again, Jack may have sort of better information to hand, but in some journal or journals, you know, particularly in sort of the upper part of sort of the hierarchy, it's not uncommon to have a sort of 90% rejection rate. So out of 10 articles submitted, 9 are sort of told not interested at the first instance, and then only the 10% are even sort of given consideration. That there's no guarantee to sort of publication. All that will then happen is those people will be asked to sort of to, well, it'll go through to referees like the examiners, that they will sort of give their opinion, and at that sort of point you have to sort of to, you know, assuming that they don't sort of that their conclusions are that this thing is not worthy of publication and they reject it. By and large, that's normally sort of the end of the process. As far as that journal is concerned, they're not really interested. They tell you don't bother coming back with the same thing. You have to come back with something new. Although, yeah, that there may be limits, but sort of, and you can certainly sort of go and take it elsewhere and try your luck there, as it were. So think carefully about where you're going to start. And I would normally say at the beginning, you know, be modest in your intentions, because of course that's more valuable. Write as though you write as though your work is meaningful and important. Indeed, the important thing is, if you don't believe it, then don't expect others to. And indeed, the important thing about sort of the review process is the sort of, if you do it, then of course it's a really sort of valuable process of getting feedback. I know that sort of enough people, and I've been through it myself, it doesn't feel like that at the time, but nonetheless, the sort of, if people say this thing needs improvement, then fine. Yeah, that's positive. Quite clearly, if you submit to a journal and they say it's not good enough for us, yeah, and reject it, that doesn't feel like a very constructive part of the process. But nonetheless, what I would always say is that sort of, if they give you sort of feedback and they say do this, this, and this, or they make recommendations about things you should do, see that as a part of the constructive criticism. And if you can then work through that and develop something better, then, you know, without exception, I also believe that the thing will be sort of better in the sort of the long term. And also take that advice when they sort of your examiners are sort of giving you the sort of that feedback for your own doctorate, because you'll undoubtedly produce a much better piece of work. I mean, quite clearly, reviewing is going on all the time. If you've got supervisors, then they're looking at your work, so that's part of sort of the review process. And indeed, don't be sort of frightened to sort of give your work to colleagues or to other students. And when you go to sort of conferences, that's what's also going on. People will be reviewing and helping to sort of to develop your ideas, to sharpen the sort of the theoretical perspectives, or maybe to sort of to advise on a change in your methodology, all of which is a very valuable part of the sort of the process of sort of continual learning. And I think that an academic, if they're not continually learning and rethinking their work, then there's something sort of not quite right. And my point about all of this is that sort of the more you learn, the better you become, it seems to me. So and indeed, critique, self-reflection and self-critique is a good thing. And the more you do this, I think the better you become. And indeed, the worst academics I've come across are those who don't sort of do this, and they're going to, and of course you're inevitably heading for sort of a bit of a fall. My point again always is that sort of if you can sort of do something, think, see it through the eyes of others, there is always a danger. I remember somebody saying many years ago, academics, they fall in love with their work, and they, you know, it's a bit like you fall in love with anything, and you don't see the sort of the problems. The more you can sort of think, well, how would other people regard this? then the better that the sort of the piece of work will be. Okay, I'm just looking at, we've just had a delivery. That's why I had to sort of move from the back group, so, and they seem to have disappeared. So, okay. So, also, if you're asked to resubmit, see it positively, and I fully acknowledge the sort of the reality that it won't feel sort of positive. It will feel like you've been kicked in the teeth and various other parts of your body. It's a painful process. But nonetheless, if you can sort of take the sort of criticism and you're able then to sort of to do something which, of course, to respond to sort of the criticism or the constructive criticism, and to modify the piece of work sufficient so that it will pass or be published more particularly, which is what we're interested, then I think it's a sort of valuable part of the sort of the overall process. But of course, the point is that it does take time and effort, and it's painful, and therefore, of course, you've got to sort of go through the sort of the various aspects of this to sort of get to the end, which of course is the sort of the fact that you'll have a sort of published piece of work, and yeah, that's the sort of the payoff, of course. Okay, the fundamentals of academic publishing also are: be consistent. Make sure that sort of you write in a way which is convincing and that you can explain what you're doing. And also the other thing, keep it relatively simple. If you try and develop too many complex ideas, then a bit like something that's a pan that's overheating, if I use that particular analogy, it spills all over the place. So that the more you can keep the thing bounded and under control, the more likely it is that you'll have something which is better in the sort of the end. To provide evidence to demonstrate the sort of the veracity, the truthfulness of the ideas, or whatever it is that you've done, because as I say, evidence through the data, that's what sort of drives research. And without good data to show why this thing is one way or another, or the theory has been proved or disproved, or you've helped to sort of to explore, the better you can do it. Brainstorms ideas and have definite direction. Again, have a clear plan of what you're going to do. Again, those of you that cannot research for doctorates will know that there'll be a million and one ideas, well, not a million and one, but maybe umpteen ideas, and the skill is to sort of to select those which have got most chances of success. But again, by deconstructing, keeping it relatively simple, and avoiding a lot of the things, if you can, which are going to sort of take you up dead ends, or perhaps be less meaningful, will certainly sort of avoid the sort of the problems of wasting time. Also, write in a precise and accurate way. Again, and this is something I tend to sort of write long sentences. By keeping it to sharp, that's what makes sort of really attractive reading. And dare I say, if you don't believe me, read journalistic articles. And again, I know that sort of when you're sort of writing for academic purposes, it's not about journalism, but at the same sort of time, journalists are very good at getting ideas over in a sort of really pithy way. Somebody who can write summarize something in a couple of hundred words, it takes a great deal of skill. And indeed, one of the things that you may have to do is to sort of write an abstract, and summarizing is actually quite a skill. But by summarizing, keep it simple and short, it will help the sort of the writing to sort of be more persuasive. But I would also say go on writing courses, because they're very useful to help you to sort of develop this skill. Quite clearly, adhere to word limits. If whatever you're writing for, whether it be sort of a doctoral thesis or a chapter or for a sort of journal, and they tell you that the word limit is X, do not exceed it, because if for instance, and I've seen this happen, if the journal article says that the chapter should be no more than 5,000 words, which is 6, you've just given them a guaranteed way to sort of to put you into sort of the immediate reject. They're not even going to bother consider it, because you can't even adhere to their own rules. I know that sort of word limits can be difficult, but that's the sort of the nature of the game. Do what is required, because of course, as I say, you're just giving sort of a reason to sort of to knock you back. And indeed, be aware. I'm going to read this as entirely short. So learn to write economically or pithily. It's a really great skill, and indeed, the clever writers are able to sort of do this and to sort of to reach their audience in a sort of a way which, of course, is much more persuasive. And indeed, just as a footnote, I'd always say that the most important chapter of any sort of book or certainly in your thesis is the introduction. If you summarize neatly, then of course that's the thing that people normally go to first. And if you give the reader confidence that you've done this well in the introduction, you put their mind at rest. That's something to really sort of dedicate your efforts to. Okay, make sure the paper reads well. Avoid the disconnected sentences or the things that sort of grammatically correct. And certainly, I know that the international journals, that they're normally in English, although other languages are available. And I really sort of understand that sort of if English is not your first language, it's difficult to produce the level of sort of grammatically correct sentences that sort of native-born writers, particularly those who are sort of skilled in this regard, are able to do. But hey, that's the nature of sort of the endeavour. And indeed, if that's if you want to be in international sort of journals. If you don't, you want to write it your native language, then of course you narrow the sort of the options down, and indeed you'll only go for the sort of the journals in your own language, and that's fine. But of course, normally I would suggest that the highest ranked journals, they're normally in English, although in recent sort of years, I'm talking about the last couple of decades, there has been a sort of vast increase in sort of Chinese journals, some of which are in English, but many of which are in sort of Chinese. And I would never try and write in Chinese because it's just too difficult. But hey, Chinese academics, they write in English journals. So all things are possible, but do what you think will work best. And also, this may sort of seem pretty obvious, but select a title which is accurate and descriptive, and then but keep it short. I've sort of come across titles in the past, and you lose the will to live just reading the title, because it's far too long. And the title should not be a sort of a glorified abstract. It should be as short as possible, but as informative as possible. So again, think carefully about that, because of course that's the other thing. You see, you want your title to sort of stick out in which way is such that people will sort of look at it. I need to read that. That is important. Okay, and the final slide of this particular section, proofreading is really valuable. If you can get someone to sort of do this on your behalf, then it may sort of take out some of the sort of the issues which, if they get picked up later on, the proofreading and the sort of the grammatically incorrect aspects are what sort of really niggle examiners, and it makes them much less inclined to want to publish your work, or to agree that it should be published than not. So if you can get rid of that, then you've done yourself a service. Also, I think this should be obvious to anybody, any academic. Substantiate. Make sure you've got plenty of references to show that, of course, the thing is it's got something behind it. And indeed, I always think that in research, you start with the literature and you end with the literature, and in the interviewing process is the sort of data in such a way as the sort of that you provide, you're adding to it. But nonetheless, as I said, sort of the body of knowledge that exists is to sort of show that there was some sort of wisdom or established knowledge, as I might call it, and that's what you've developed. Know your audience. Think about who are the normal readers of the journal outlet. I'm thinking journals in particular, because of course, quite clearly, they are the people that you're going to need to persuade. And indeed, more particularly, the academic referees are normally sort of well versed in the sort of expectations that there will be for the sort of particular article. And if you can get into that sort of mindset, then of course you can sort of address the sort of the concerns that they're bound to have. And finally, but not as far as the sort of this presentation is concerned, practice makes you perfect. Well, it doesn't make you perfect. I should put it absolutely correct, but it certainly helps to make you perfect. There's no such thing as perfection. Indeed, that's something that you'll probably come across if you sort of strive to get something which achieves perfection. You will never do it, because there's always something more you can do. The point is, though, the more you practice, the better you get, and you sort of, and then dare I say, the sort of the most gifted writers, unless they were born with that skill, that they had to work on their sort of their talents, as it were, and the more you do it, the better you become at it. It's like everything in life. Clear messages. I'm going to leave this because I'm not sure I can sort of add to this, that sort of the research cycle consists of certain things, and any sort of particular research that, or any where you publish research. I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. There's an abstract, but all that is sort of a pithy summary of a couple of hundred words, which is what people sort of use. You know, the indices of summaries or abstracts, I should say. I just use as a really good way for people to sort of go through quickly and to find the articles that sort of most of interest to them. You know, I certainly did when I was doing my own PhD. The introduction, that's a sort of glorified contents page. I would also say you've got to sort of provide some sort of indication of what your two methods in, so two S methods. So the method, singular, or methods, plural, is what you use to sort of to collect the data or to elicit the sort of data that you've used, which comes in the next section, whether that be qualitative, quantitative, or some sort of variation thereof, some sort of mixture. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, whatever you do, you've got to sort of describe the justification and the philosophical considerations that you went through to get to that stage, the analysis thereof, how you sort of made sense of the data. I haven't actually sort of put in conclusion, but discussion rather, but discussion is part of the analysis. So if you wish, you could actually put in another bullet point here, which is the discussion aspect of the work. That comes as sort of straight output of the sort of the analysis, and particularly where it sort of compares to sort of the existing sort of literature, which of course I suppose is another point that I should added here if you wanted to make it complete. It starts sort of like a long list, but the assumption is that there sort of will be literature in here. And then of course, you know, from all of that, what conclusions can be derived. You see there on sort of the right hand side a neat sort of diagram of the sort of the various stages. Okay. Again, I think you can sort of read all this. I said 200, 250 words. It'll vary depending upon the sort of publication, but it really is. It's just a sort of a really sort of pithy summary, which includes all the vital aspects. So once you've read the abstract, you kind of know what's coming. It's kind of the advert for the sort of the film. So you've seen the sort of the trailer. Now you want to go and see the sort of the whole thing. It makes the reader know that this is of interest. This is what it will consist of, and all the things that sort of that the final body of work, whether it be sort of the thesis or the sort of the chapter or the book or the sort of the article that you produce in a journal, it's got all sort of these various elements. So it's what you'll understand from reading this, the uniqueness and relevance of the work, and why people indeed, as I say, should sort of read your work. So that's the abstract. The introduction, I mentioned it's a glorified context or exemplified context. So it just merely goes through the sort of the various aspects in sort of a slightly more detailed way of what the sort of the reader should expect. Dare I say, if you're writing a novel, quite often what novelists do is they have a sort of a twist or a shock in the sort of the last chapter. When you're sort of reading academic work, there should be no shocks. You kind of know what to expect because it's all already been summarized in sort of the introduction and maybe even in the sort of the abstract, but certainly introduction says in the conclusion, in sort of the introduction, certain things will be concluded which the reader will be fully aware of. So no shocks by the time you get to that section. Keep it simple and logical and coherent. And indeed, as I've done this, make sure that sort of if there's any sort of changes that you make later on, go back and rewrite the introduction. Indeed, quite often I suggest that sort of the introduction is the sort of the last bit that you write, because of course it's the overall sort of summary of everything that you've done. Don't overcomplicate. Yeah, simplicity is something I'd always say in all writing. Keep it as simple as possible, because if you start with something complex, it gets more complex. So so even with simple things, they inevitably become more complicated. And one of the most difficult thing of some students is when they sort of you know what they want to do. You're trying to sort of say, look, yeah, it's far too complex and there's too many things going on, and you know that it'll become nigh impossible to achieve that sort of research if they continue down that road. The methods, again, I probably don't have to tell you what methods are about, but again, what you've got to be able to do in sort of this space that you've got available depends upon sort of the outlet, what you've done, why you rejected other approaches, because of course that's often part of the sort of the sort of the persuasiveness, because some people say, well, I would have done it differently. Why you decided not to do it that way, why the sort of the approach that you've taken is finding it unique to sort of the approach that you've taken. And indeed, particularly if you're using sort of, you're kind of stepping out sort of the normal sort of conventions or orthodoxies, because that can be interesting. And that's what will sort of cause people to sort of be interested, but also to be sort of slightly critical. Why have they done something which I would not have done? Why have they've been, to use the expression again, radical? And there's nothing wrong with radicalism as long as you can substantiate the sort of the wisdom of so doing. And indeed, of course, the thing is, though, that what you're also trying to do is to sort of to show what the positions are of the sort of the key thinkers, or the sort of established those who provide established wisdom, and why your approach is different, and it allows the sort of the readers to derive different knowledge from the sort of the methods that you've used. Data, okay. One of the big issues, and some of you may have had this, if you're doing qualitative work, you'll have huge chunks of sort of interviews data or transcripts. You can't put everything in because, of course, it'll just sort of beef it out. So somehow or other, you can only use the sort of the nuggets. This is why numerical data is much easier, because you can put it into tabular form, and of course that doesn't sort of soak up your sort of your word limit, or doesn't sort of use it quickly. But of course, the point is, though, so graphs, tables, whatever you can do to sort of to summarize and to sort of to make it easy for sort of the reader to derive understanding is always going to be sort of well received. And again, all readers, even academics, have limited time, so the more you can make their life easier, the better. I think to concentrate on that aspect, and you'll have done this yourself, because you know that when you're sort of reading around the sort of the topic, there's a huge amount, and you cannot read everything. All you can do is to sort of to read good summaries, and indeed there are very useful journal articles which are not necessarily about sort of the new knowledge in. I wouldn't suggest you do this too often, but your journal article is a summation of all the existing knowledge, and it helps people to understand what's out there. So it's a distillation of, I don't know, whatever it might be, 20 or 30 journal articles, and you've put it into a sort of neat summary. You kind of distilled it down to sort of the basic aspects, and that can be a really helpful way, if you like, of getting through a lot quickly. And you occasionally come across this where somebody's done this, and if they've done it well, it can be very, very, very helpful to the researcher. Data presentation contains no results. All you do is that this is what came out of the experiments or the interviews, or whatever. But as I always appreciate, there is, particularly in qualitative aspects, there's got to be some degree of interpretation, because you cannot produce everything or present everything, because of course it will just go on forever. So you have to sort of to decide, well, this was relevant, this was not so relevant. So clearly, your judgment becomes absolutely sort of crucial. And again, when you come back to sort of in the methods chapter or aspect of whatever this publication is, do sort of emphasize that sort of you put yourself in the position of carrying out interpretation, and why you did it the way you did, because again, you'll be able to sort of shut off some of the sort of criticism someone may have of your work. And I'm not saying criticism necessarily follows, but academics are very good at sort of picking fault. If there's guidance presentation, don't depart, do what they ask for. Always stick to sort of the rules, because that's a good way not to sort of fall foul of their internal sort of house style. Analysis, again, whatever you do, I was kind of leading into that just a moment ago. Be concise, keep it relevant, stick to sort of the basic ideas. If the ideas are not quite so relevant, and often that happens, that you try and do a lot, you may have to then sort of take out the sort of the things which are not relevant, or indeed, it may be that the article that you thought you were going to write, it becomes too big. So then you think about doing a second version or a third one, and you split it up into bits. So you're looking at various aspects, and that's a really good way. And quite often that's what happens with PhDs. They turn into sort of umpteens of articles where you look at particular bits and you do it in much greater detail, but don't try and do everything in one go. Clarity is absolutely important in terms of, sort of data. The more clear things are in terms of the style of presentation, so the ability to write, the better. And indeed, what you're always trying to read is that what you've done is really important.
you're showing where the knowledge has been sort of advanced through the sort of work that you carried out, and that's what makes it sort of worthy of publication. So the more you sort of justify what you've done, how you've done it, and the right explanation, the better. And keep it on time, so time is getting on. Okay. Yeah, the conclusions to the piece of work. You should try to demonstrate why the work is important and why it should be published, and it should speak for itself. Demonstrate those makers why they shouldn't miss the opportunity to include your work, because and that's what sometimes they're looking for, particularly in the sort of the really sort of competitive journals. That they're not looking to include, they're looking to exclude, and anything you do that sort of that helps to sort of to include is better. But again, there's a skill in that. You've really got to know your audience and the referees, the people that they well, I try to think that the more you can get in the mind of the sort of the referees who sort of work for a particular outlet, the better, and think, well, what is it they're expecting, and how can I sort of tick all the boxes that they will have. And indeed, it might be useful to sort of, in the sort of the letter that you sort of provide, or the email, to sort of provide a restatement, which actually sort of allows you to sort of exemplify and to sort of to demonstrate why they shouldn't miss out on your work. But again, like everything, dare I say, some journals, they are overwhelmed by sort of articles coming in. It's a bit like publishers. You hear that many of them they don't even bother reading it, because they're looking for something different, and how you can cut through that is really sort of difficult. I mean, I've heard of people submitting on coloured paper to sort of to make it stick out, but that's kind of just a sort of cliche trick. You've got to sort of to whatever you send in the first instance, and normally there will be sort of some sort of brief statement. That's the thing that will sort of make the thing stick out. And this is the sort of negative aspects, and again, it kind of really clarifies, or it sort of just later goes back and says a lot of things I've already said. You've not done what's required. It's not considered relevant, because the work is not what they sort of normally publish. They feel that the work needs greater clarity, refinement, the writing's not good. You've not complied with the sort of the guide for authors, and dare I say, and this applies to sort of to a large number of sort of journals, that the inadequate standard of English, and all that you've done, and it may be one or many of those that you've fallen foul of, you've given an opportunity just to sort of reject the first instance. Again, I talked about this a moment ago. If you can provide a really sort of persuasive covering email or letter, don't beg, because that won't persuade them, but do all the sort of things about sort of I just mentioned a few moments ago, as to sort of why this piece of work is so sort of special that they shouldn't miss out on it. And indeed, you hear this all the time, that sort of people who sort of certainly in the world of publishing, they went through various publishers, and it was just a sort of bit of luck that somebody sort of saw their piece of work. I think it was J.K. Rowling, one of the most successful authors in the world, and she went to sort of various publishers. Most of them, they didn't think this piece of work, Harry Potter, had much sort of scope for in their world. But somebody eventually got out. I can't remember who the publisher was. We got them kicking back in the house somewhere. And they made millions out of it. Okay, anybody who goes into academic publishing, let me sort of tell you from experience, you don't make money. But of course, what it does do is it develops your sort of academic credibility and reputation, and that's how you sort of get the sort of the job promotions, and you move to other institutions. And the best researchers, they become a bit like well, in any sort of sector, they are the sort of stars of their world. And of course, they don't necessarily have to apply for jobs; they get sort of poached by others because of the sort of their research work. Choosing a journal. Again, it's really difficult, and I can't give you any simple advice, but go to the one that you think you've got most chance of being published in. And if you're really new in the sort of work that you're doing, also if you've just completed your PhD, for instance, or your doctorate, if it's DBA, and you go to a 4-star journal and you get knocked back, then don't be surprised, because even the sort of the seasoned and well-established, well-experienced academics, they regularly get rejected by the 4-star journals, and they have a huge attrition rate. So be modest in your sort of expectations. and you see the sort of cartoon there. It's it's a really difficult process, and anybody who says it's not is not telling you the truth. It's publishing in sort of the academic world of or the academic journals is difficult, to say the least. And again, why publish in journals? It's about sort of career, it's about something development, it's about your business, it's about sort of the altruism, it's about various things. But ultimately, of course, journals they welcome their stock in trade. Their very business is publishing new knowledge. The more that you can do this, the better. So again, have a look at and think very carefully about where you want to start. And if you start modest, you can always build up, and that's, dare I say, how all academics and also academic writers, they've normally done a sort of many years this before they get to sort of the pinnacle. And I have to also say is that sort of the 4-star journals, they're normally publishing sort of the inter-institutional and international work through various institutions. So sole authors, which I suspect that probably this is where most of you will be at this stage, unless you're lucky enough to be part of an international collaboration, they're not going to be interested, because they have enough articles given to them to work on that basis. Select the right journal. So again, if you get the idea, as you say, I've taken this from Emerald, so this is not my answer to views, but Emerald is it's kind of it doesn't tend to be regarded as the pinnacle of academic research, but I'm not knocking that sense that they're very good in a wide spectrum of sort of, and quite often sort of the juxtaposition or the sort of the link up to practice. So what they say is good. So think carefully about where you publish, or you submit to rather. Think about the readership who you want to sort of get to. That can also be really, really important. And that's why low level or lower level journals, which are read by practitioners, if at all, or practice level journals. And there is a sort of crossover. It can be sort of really, really valuable. And indeed, the rankings, they can be important. I know that some institutions that they live or die by rankings, and many international research departments, unless they're getting 4-star journal articles, that's seen as sort of failure amongst their academics. Citation are good, but not complete guide to quality. So just because you've been cited lots doesn't mean to say that the piece of work was any good. It might be rubbish. It might be really controversial, but people sort of liked quoting it. And of course, it's the sort of the applicability in a lot of departments, and how it's then translated into sort of to practical everyday use, and theories that sort of become mainstream are sort of really important. That's why journals dedicated to medicine. Medicine is about making things better, and of course the really good articles are then those that sort of the academics will be sort of put into practice, either doctors and the surgeons, today, tomorrow, next week. And indeed, the last bit here, be political. Think about sort of whether it's national, international, and strategic. 5 articles in low-ranked journals, or versus one in a top-ranked journal article, or top-ranked journal. The point being that you'll probably put 5 times more effort into this, because of course that's the sort of nature of the endeavour, with all sort of certain caveats. So is it quantity or quality? And I'll leave that for you to sort of decide, because it's really difficult at this stage. I would suggest stick it at the sort of the lower end to start off with, graduate upwards. It'll obviously depend upon your career. And again, I'm not going to sort of go through all this, because I think time is going through it. It's a really sort of, by the way, these slides will be sort of available afterwards. Have a look at sort of this, because of course it does provide a nice sort of flow chart of what sort of happens in terms of sort of the editorial process, the publication, production, and then the sort of the users. And for everything you do, that there will always be a sort of final output. And of course, a lot of them are sort of electronic these days, but if you go to any sort of academic library, you'll see the sort of the academic journals on the bookshelf, because they're still sort of hard copies. Okay, peer review is a process. Basically, you're going through sort of a refereeing, as you'll do for sort of examination. So consider sort of what they do, and sort of the unknown rules that they will be applying. Normally, they don't have a sort of particularly sort of onerous sort of set of sort of criteria to sort of judge things, but they will know what the expectations are. I've said this here, almost all published work has had some revision of some sort during the process. Rarely does anything go into sort of the process and come out exactly the same. That's the sort of the nature of sort of refereeing into all these examinations. One case versus the students not asked to sort of make any amendments. It's a pretty superb piece of work. Again, always think about sort of what you want to achieve, which of course is something which contributes to sort of field knowledge, and you're seeing therefore having been published as becoming an expert, you're accepted into the academy. Okay, finally, so to get to the end of this, publish or perish rather is utterly relevant to all research. If you don't sort of publish, then you become irrelevant, perhaps, but you're just unknown, which of course is probably worse. But the thesis is critical. And again, think about sort of the doctoral work. It will generate lots of outputs. That's it. It can be then sort of divided up and sort of you can get an awful lot out of it, but like a sort of turkey at Christmas. There'll be various bits that you can sort of live on for you hope many years to come. And it will be part of your sort of academic journey. And indeed, I use this as an expression that it's publication is part of the sort of research journey. And it will help you in terms of sort of career development and your sort of standing within the academic community. Also, always talk to your supervisor, because they'll have a lot of experience in this regard. They'll give you sort of tips, guidance, and more particularly, of course, what they'll be able to do, and you hope, is to sort of collaborate, because, of course, they'll have had a hand in this work. And if you can get published with their name or their involvement, then it's good for them, good for you. So it's good all round. As I keep emphasising, what you want to do is to be part of the sort of the community to develop your reputation. Okay, and I think at this sort of stage, I sort of revert back to I probably end the sharing. Oh, in fact, I'll invite Jack to actually say a few words about what comes next.
Sorry, I might hand over to Anna if you're with us, Anna.
Or Anna, if Anna's available.
Yes.
For sure. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. But exactly, like with Jack, you are the best person to talk about this part, because the publishing club is exactly your club within the doctorate hub. So you perhaps want to tell a bit more about what you do during your sessions.
They do vary. We either do a series of sessions where we have concerted effort on actual writing, and do checkpoints, or particularly if there's any pain points or any aspect we want to discuss. On others, we'll actually go through a writing component. So maybe a paragraph that we focus on, have really going critique into that particular paragraph, and then again, have time and effort to go into writing. So we're looking at different snippets of how to improve the writing skill as we go. So that's a component on that. Other than that, we also look at conference papers. We've had a number of sessions where people have been focusing on writing conference paper, for example, the BAM, which is about to come up. So they're both developmental papers or full papers that are submitted, and then go through the review process. So we go for a few different angles, and also then they continually evolve onto a journal article quality. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Anna?
No, that sounds perfect. And I think that it's also now the time to ask if there are any questions, and potentially also to stop the recording that exactly
yes, shall do.
to be